Welcome to the darkest corners of your imagination, where fear knows no boundaries. This is Mr. Night Scares Story, the home of spine-chilling tales that will haunt your dreams. Here, the night comes alive with stories of unspeakable terror, from cursed forests to haunted houses, from lurking shadows to untold urban legends. We bring you nightmares you'll never wake up from. Are you brave enough to face what lies ahead? Once you enter, there's no turning back. Subscribe now, if you dare. And remember, every story you hear here might just be true. Mr. Night Scares Story, where fear becomes reality. Story number 1. The Haunting of Blackthorn Manor. Nestled deep in the shadowed forests of Maine, hidden by towering pines and a creeping mist, stood Blackthorn Manor, a decaying relic of an era long gone. For over 80 years, it had been the centerpiece of gruesome stories. Locals swore that the house itself was alive, feeding off the misery and fear of anyone who dared step inside. The last known occupants, the Wexler family, vanished in 1942, leaving behind no bodies, only a trail of blood and whispers of dark rituals. Blackthorn Manor's reputation as the most cursed house in New England had made it a rite of passage for thrill-seekers and skeptics alike. Most ran out before midnight. Others never came back. For college friends, each with their own reason for braving Blackthorn Manor, piled into a battered SUV on a crisp October evening. Jenny, the group's de facto leader, had something to prove. A budding journalist, she was determined to debunk the legend and score her first major story. "There's no such thing as ghosts," she repeated like a mantra, though her nervous energy suggested otherwise. Mark, her boyfriend and a proud skeptic, was less enthusiastic. To him, this was a waste of a weekend. Lisa, Jenny's best friend, was a believer. She clutched a rosary and a thick notebook, scribbled with occult symbols and protective chants. Chris, the joker of the group, treated the whole thing like a prank opportunity. By the time they arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the manor in eerie shadows. The house loomed before them like a gaping mouth, its windows shattered and dark. The front door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. "Last chance to back out," Chris said with a grin, though his voice wavered. Jenny took the lead, stepping over the threshold into the darkness. The moment they crossed into the house, the air shifted. It was colder, thicker, like the house was breathing around them. The grand foyer greeted them with an oppressive silence. Dust-covered chandeliers swayed slightly, though there was no wind. Faded wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing claw-like scratches beneath. As they explored, they noticed the first signs of something wrong. In the dining room, an untouched table was set for dinner, complete with rotting food. The smell of decay was overpowering. Lisa swore she heard faint laughter coming from the walls, but Mark brushed it off as old house noises. Jenny set up her camcorder in the parlor. "We'll do a seance at midnight," she announced, ignoring Lisa's horrified look. Chris laughed and suggested they use the Ouija board he'd brought. "Not funny," Lisa hissed. "You don't mess with things like this." As the night deepened, the house began to change. Doors that were once open slammed shut. The staircase creaked as though someone was walking on it, though no one was there. And in the upstairs hallway, Chris found a child's doll sitting upright in the middle of the floor. When he picked it up, its glassy eyes moved to stare directly at him. While exploring the house, they found a locked door leading to the basement. Jenny, ever the investigator, insisted they break it down. With a few kicks, the old wood gave way, revealing a steep staircase descending into pitch-black darkness. The air grew colder as they ventured down. The flashlight beams barely pierced the heavy gloom. The basement was vast, with stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center was an altar stained with what looked like old blood. Around it were dozens of photographs, all of the Wexler family, their faces scratched out. Scrawled in dark red on the walls were the words, "She watches. She waits." Lisa's rosary snapped in her trembling hands. A loud bang echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Chris screamed, "Who's up there?" But no one responded. When they returned to the main floor, the furniture was overturned, the windows sealed shut, and their gear was scattered. The front door was gone. Panic set in as the house seemed to come alive. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, creeping closer when no one was looking. The group tried to stick together, but the house had other plans. Chris was the first to disappear. While walking through the library, he stopped dead, staring into the corner of the room. The others turned to see what he was looking at but saw nothing. When they turned back, Chris was gone. All that remained was his flashlight, flickering on the floor. Lisa begged to leave, but there was no way out. Windows now revealed only an endless void of darkness. Hallways stretched on forever, looping back on themselves. Mark began hearing voices, faint whispers calling his name. He followed them, disappearing into a bedroom. Jenny and Lisa found him moments later, standing in front of a mirror, his reflection grinning wickedly while he screamed in terror. His body convulsed and collapsed, lifeless. Jenny and Lisa fled to the attic, desperate to escape the horrors below. There, they found the source of the evil, a massive mirror, its surface rippling like liquid. Inside the mirror, shadows writhed and clawed, whispering in voices that were both familiar and alien. Lisa screamed as the mirror began to glow, pulling her towards it with an unseen force. Jenny tried to hold her back, but the pull was too strong. Lisa's body hit the mirror and vanished into its surface, her screams echoing long after she was gone. The mirror's surface returned to normal, reflecting only Jenny's pale, terrified face. "You're next," her reflection whispered, grinning. When the sun rose, the house was silent. The police, alerted by the friends' families, found no trace of the group, only their abandoned equipment and a single blood-stained notebook. The camcorder footage ended with Jenny's terrified face as she whispered, "It's not just the house. It's her." To this day, Blackthorn Manor stands, rotting in the woods. Locals warn outsiders to stay away, but every so often, someone ventures inside, lured by curiosity or arrogance. They never come out. Some say if you approach the house after midnight, you can see Jenny's face in the attic window, her reflection smiling back at you, waiting, watching. Story number 2. The Curse of Raven Hollow. Raven Hollow was a forgotten town buried deep in the Appalachian Mountains, shrouded in fog and a legacy of terror. At its heart stood the Harrington House, a decrepit mansion that had been abandoned for nearly a century. No one dared approach it. Rumors told of the Harrington family, wealthy coal barons who vanished in 1910 after a string of grisly murders within their walls. Some claimed it was revenge from the miners they exploited. Others believed the Harringtons had invoked something far darker. It was said that anyone who stepped foot in the mansion would awaken a curse, unleashing horrors upon themselves and anyone they loved. The house hungered for souls, and once it marked you, there was no escape. When Nathaniel received the letter, he thought it was a joke. He was an urban explorer with a growing YouTube channel, Nightmare Escapes, and fans often sent him tips about haunted locations. This letter, however, was different. It was written in elegant cursive on aged paper, inviting him to explore Raven Hollow and document the Harrington house. "Come alone," it read. "The truth awaits." Intrigued, Nathaniel couldn't resist. He'd been chasing the perfect haunted location for years, and this sounded like his big break. But curiosity had a price. Nathaniel drove through winding mountain roads until he reached Raven Hollow. The air grew colder as he approached, his GPS cutting out, leaving him to navigate by instinct. The town was a ghost of its former self. Boarded-up windows, rusted street signs, and a church bell that tolled faintly in the distance, though the tower was empty. The Harrington house loomed at the edge of town, a monstrous silhouette against the evening sky. Its once grand facade was cracked and rotting, vines curling around broken windows. The front gate creaked open as if welcoming him, though no wind stirred. Nathaniel hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. His camera was rolling and he forced a grin. "All right, Nightmare fans, this is it. The most haunted house in America. Let's see what's inside." The foyer was a tomb of silence, broken only by the crunch of Nathaniel's boots on shattered glass. Dust hung thick in the air, catching the beam of his flashlight. The grand staircase stretched upward into darkness, its banisters carved with grotesque faces that seemed to follow him. Nathaniel began exploring, narrating into his camera. He found a parlor with a grand piano, its keys covered in a layer of grime. When he turned away, a single note played, sharp and discordant. He whipped around, but no one was there. Then he noticed the writing on the walls. At first, it seemed like faded wallpaper, but as his flashlight passed over it, words began to appear. Leave now. Nathaniel laughed nervously. Okay, that's creepy. The deeper he ventured, the stranger things became. Portraits of the Harrington family lined the walls, their faces obscured by scratches and burns. In one room, he found a shattered mirror, its shards glinting like jagged teeth. When he looked into the largest fragment, he saw his reflection smiling, though his face was grim. Footsteps echoed above him, heavy and deliberate. Gripping his flashlight tighter, Nathaniel climbed the stairs, each step groaning beneath his weight. The second floor was colder, the air heavy with the scent of decay. A nursery door creaked open as he passed, revealing a room filled with broken toys and a crib draped in cobwebs. He stepped inside, the camera capturing every detail. The faint sound of a music box began to play, a haunting lullaby that made his skin crawl. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. The music stopped. He felt a presence behind him, cold breath on the back of his neck. Slowly, he turned, but the room was empty. "Who's there?" he called, his voice shaking. The only answer was a whisper, "You shouldn't have come." Nathaniel bolted from the nursery, his heart pounding. As he moved, the house seemed to shift around him. Hallways stretched unnaturally long. Doors appeared where there hadn't been any before, and his flashlight flickered, plunging him into brief bouts of darkness. In the dining room, he found a massive table set for a feast. Plates were piled with rotting food, maggots squirming through the decay. At the head of the table sat a figure, a man in an old-fashioned suit, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes black as coal. "Welcome," the man said, his voice like a rusted hinge. Nathaniel stumbled backward, but when he looked again, the figure was gone. He fled to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Desperate, he threw himself at it, only to hear laughter, a low, guttural chuckle that came from everywhere and nowhere. Then he saw it. Shadows poured from the corners of the room, coalescing into a massive, writhing form. It had no face, only a gaping maw filled with teeth. It lunged at him, and he barely managed to escape up the stairs. Nathaniel found himself in the attic, the highest point of the house. The room was filled with relics of the past. Trunks of old clothes, faded photographs, and a single rocking chair that moved on its own. On the far wall was a painting of the Harrington family. This one was untouched, but something about it felt wrong. The longer he stared, the more he realized why. One of the figures, an old woman, was staring directly at him, her painted eyes alive and filled with malice. The attic door slammed shut, and Nathaniel felt a searing pain on his arm. Looking down, he saw a mark forming, a jagged black symbol that seemed to burn into his flesh. The whispers returned, louder now, screaming in his ears. "You belong to her." Nathaniel stumbled out of the house at dawn, his camera still clutched in his shaking hands. He drove away, vowing never to return, but the damage was done. When he reviewed the footage later, he saw things he hadn't noticed. Figures standing behind him, shadows moving on their own, and in every reflection, the old woman's face, smiling. It wasn't long before Nathaniel realized the curse had followed him. His friends began having accidents, his family fell ill, and at night, he could hear the faint sound of a music box, no matter where he went. The final video he ever posted was a desperate warning. "Don't go to Raven Hollow. Don't go to the Harrington house. She won't let you leave." 2 weeks later, Nathaniel disappeared, leaving behind only his camera. The last frame was of the old woman, standing in the corner of his bedroom, smiling. Story number 3. Whispering Pines, the forest that hungers. Hidden deep in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon lies Whispering Pines, a forest so dense and foreboding that sunlight struggles to penetrate its canopy. For generations, locals have avoided the area, warning travelers of the ancient curse that lingers there. They say the forest whispers to those who enter, luring them deeper until they're never seen again. Some believe the trees themselves are alive, feeding off the despair and fear of those trapped inside. But the real terror is something much older, something that has been waiting in the heart of the forest for centuries. 3 weeks before Halloween, a group of 5 hikers vanished in Whispering Pines. Their campsite was found abandoned, their tents shredded, and their gear scattered. The only clue was a camera containing grainy footage of the group running in terror through the trees, screaming for help. When the story hit the news, it sparked the interest of thrill seekers across the state, including Alex, a documentary filmmaker obsessed with the paranormal. He convinced his friends, Rachel, a cryptid enthusiast, Marcus, a survivalist, and Emily, his reluctant but loyal girlfriend, to join him in investigating the forest. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, Alex said as they packed their gear. Emily frowned. Or it could be a mistake. The group arrived at Whispering Pines on a gray, overcast morning. The forest loomed before them, a wall of ancient trees draped in moss. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, and an eerie stillness pervaded the area. Creepy as hell, Marcus muttered, adjusting his machete. As they ventured deeper, the trail grew faint, swallowed by undergrowth. Strange symbols were carved into the bark of the trees, spirals, jagged lines, and what looked like eyes. Rachel eagerly snapped photos. These markings are old, she said. Could be Native American, or maybe something even older. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The group began hearing faint whispers, like a distant conversation just out of earshot. Probably the wind, Alex said, though his voice lacked confidence. But Emily stopped, her face pale. It's not the wind. They're saying our names. They set up camp in a small clearing, building a fire to keep the darkness at bay. As they ate, the whispers grew louder, circling them like unseen predators. I don't like this, Marcus said, gripping his knife. In the middle of the night, Rachel woke to the sound of branches snapping. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside the tent. Hello? She called. Her beam caught a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a man with hollow eyes and a face twisted in agony. His lips moved as if whispering, but no sound came out. Rachel screamed, waking the others. When they rushed outside, the man was gone, but his footprints remained, leading into the forest. We're leaving, Emily said, trembling, but the trail they had followed in was gone. The next morning, the group tried to retrace their steps, but every path seemed to loop back to the clearing. Marcus climbed a tree to get a better view, but when he looked out over the forest, all he saw was an endless sea of green, stretching into infinity. There's no way this forest is that big, he said, climbing down. It's like it's changing. Rachel studied the symbols on the trees. I think these are warnings. Someone was trying to keep people out. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by laughter, childlike and mocking. Shadows darted between the trees, too fast to be human. That night, the group discovered fresh symbols carved into the trees around their campsite. This time, the carvings were of stick figures hanging from nooses. By the third day, supplies were running low, and tensions were high. Marcus and Alex argued over the best course of action while Emily tried to calm them down. Rachel wandered off, following the whispers despite the others yelling for her to stop. They found her an hour later, standing in a grove of dead trees, her eyes glazed and her lips moving silently. In the center of the grove was a massive tree, its bark blackened and twisted, with thick roots that seemed to pulse like veins. When Alex touched Rachel's shoulder, she turned to him, her face streaked with tears. It's hungry, she whispered. We can't leave until it's fed. The ground beneath the tree shifted, and a grotesque shape began to emerge. A towering figure made of roots and bone, its face an empty void. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. The group ran, but the forest fought against them. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots tripped their steps, and the air grew thick with a suffocating fog. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. One by one, they were separated. Marcus was the first to fall, dragged screaming into the darkness by shadowy hands. Emily and Alex stumbled back into the dead grove, the massive tree now bleeding a thick, black sap. Rachel stood before it, arms outstretched, as if offering herself to the entity. "We have to go," Alex shouted, but Emily froze, staring at the tree. "It won't stop," she whispered. "Not until it gets what it wants." By morning, Alex stumbled out of the forest alone, disheveled and mumbling incoherently. He was found by hikers and taken to a hospital, but no one believed his story. Emily, Marcus, and Rachel were never found, and Whispering Pines was declared off-limits. Months later, Alex reviewed the footage from his camera. The final shot showed Rachel standing before the blackened tree, smiling as its roots coiled around her ankles. The last frame was of her whispering something, though no sound came through. When Alex slowed the footage, he saw faces in the shadows. His friends, their mouths open in silent screams. To this day, locals claim to hear whispers coming from Whispering Pines, beckoning them into the forest. Those who answer never come back. The forest always hungers, and it always gets its prey. Story number 4. The House That Devours. At the edge of Cold Creek, hidden behind thick woods and a wrought iron gate, stood the Blackthorn Manor, a house with a sinister reputation. Built in the 1800s by the eccentric industrialist Victor Blackthorn, the manor had been abandoned for decades. Its history was littered with mysterious disappearances and gruesome deaths, and locals swore the house itself was alive, feeding on the misfortune of anyone who dared step inside. For years, the town of Cold Creek avoided it, but legends like this always drew the curious and the reckless. It was supposed to be a simple dare, a Halloween challenge to explore the infamous Blackthorn Manor. Mia, Jake, Zoe, and Ben, for high school seniors looking for a thrill, decided to prove their bravery. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and enough bravado to mask their fear, they scaled the rusty gate one cold October night. The manor loomed in the moonlight, its once grand facade now cracked and covered in vines. The front door creaked open as they approached, as though inviting them in. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," Zoe said, her voice wavering. "Relax," Jake said, forcing a grin. "We'll be in and out in no time." They stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind them. The air inside the manor was heavy, damp, and smelled of mildew and decay. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs draped the chandeliers like tattered veils. The group began to explore, their footsteps echoing eerily in the empty halls. The walls were adorned with portraits of the Blackthorn family, their painted eyes seeming to follow the group as they moved. Mia paused in front of one portrait, her flashlight illuminating the stern face of Victor Blackthorn. "I swear his expression just changed," she whispered. "Don't freak yourself out," Ben said, though he avoided looking at the portrait. In the parlor, they found an ornate mirror. The glass was cracked, but when Jake shone his flashlight on it, their reflections were distorted, warped, as though something was wrong with them. "Is it just me? Or do we look different?" Zoe asked. "Let's keep moving," Mia said, gripping her flashlight tightly. The grand staircase spiraled upward into darkness. As they climbed, the air grew colder, and the faint sound of whispers seemed to drift from the walls. "What's that sound?" Ben asked, his voice hushed. "Probably the wind," Jake said, though his face betrayed his uncertainty. At the top of the stairs, they found a long hallway lined with doors. Each door was slightly ajar, and from one, a faint light flickered. Drawn by curiosity, the group approached, pushing the door open to reveal a small study. On the desk was a journal, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. Mia picked it up, reading aloud. "The house is alive. It watches. It waits. It feeds." Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the whispers turned to laughter, low, guttural, and mocking. Panic set in as the group tried to find their way back to the entrance, but the house seemed to shift around them. Hallways stretched endlessly. Rooms they had already explored appeared in places they shouldn't be, and the doors slammed shut behind them. "This isn't possible," Zoe said, her voice shaking. "Stay together," Mia said, though she was trembling too. As they moved, they began to notice changes in the house. The wallpaper seemed to writhe, like living skin, and the floors groaned as if something beneath them was moving. In one room, they found a dining table set for a feast, though the food was rotting and crawling with maggots. At the head of the table sat a chair that turned to face them on its own. "We need to get out of here now," Ben said, backing away. The group finally found the front door, but when they tried to open it, they found themselves in another room instead. This one was pitch black, save for a single red light glowing from the ceiling. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Shadows began to form in the corners of the room, tall and spindly with glowing eyes. "What do you want?" Mia shouted, her voice echoing. The shadows didn't answer, but the floor beneath them began to crack and crumble. The group fell, landing in a vast chamber beneath the house, its walls pulsing like the inside of a living creature. At the center of the chamber was a massive heart, beating slowly. Veins ran from it, spreading through the walls and ceiling. "The house is alive," Zoe whispered, horrified. "And it's hungry," Jake said. The shadows descended, separating the group. One by one, they were taken, their screams swallowed by the walls. Mia was the last one standing, her flashlight flickering as she backed away from the monstrous heart. A voice echoed in her mind, cold and emotionless. "Stay. Join us. Feed me." She refused, running blindly through the labyrinthine passages. Somehow, she found herself back at the front door. Summoning every ounce of courage, she flung it open and stumbled outside. When she looked back, the manor was gone. Mia was found by a passing motorist the next morning, covered in dirt and blood. She tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed her. Weeks later, she began hearing whispers in her home, soft at first, then louder. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, and at night, she dreamed of the Blackthorn Manor, its beating heart calling to her. The house wasn't finished with her. It never let its prey escape for long.